What do microplastics actually do to us? You might only be aware of a handful of microplastic studies, and it always surprises me that with over 7,000 studies on microplastics and human health, how a few have piqued big interest and get a lot of headlines, but there's so many that just get completely ignored that, in my opinion, are far more important. Now, a video came up on my feed by Ian, and I've been watching his content for years. He was talking about that one study about microplastics in cadavers from last year. Now, I've talked about that one ad nauseum, but I talked about microplastics in human brains way before that study ever came out, and yet people just really latched onto that one. So I responded some information in the comments, and he responded by saying, as far as I'm aware, we really don't know the significance of most microplastics findings on human health. I'm going to share some information about microplastics and human health and the over 7,000 plus studies that have been done just on that topic. There are many, many big impacts that microplastics have been proven to have on our bodies. And there's tons of meta-analyses and systematic reviews going on every particular topic within the human body. Microplastics have been found all over the human body in basically every single tissue that they're looking for. The predominant polymer is polyethylene, which is your food-safe plastic. I'm only going to mention two of the impacts that are very, very clear, right? And then I'm going to talk about why it's going to be way worse than just the two very clear impacts that microplastics have on our bodies. One of the strongest associations is between microplastics and cardiovascular health. There have been tons of studies showing that microplastics increase our risk for heart attack, stroke. We already know that microplastics are cytotoxic, immunotoxic, and genotoxic, right? The findings of this review, when evaluated together with additional studies utilizing animal models, suggest that micro and nanoplastics may contribute to global cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. Another big review says these particles induce oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, and apoptosis, which impair cardiovascular health. And yes, they increase your risk of a heart attack. The conclusion was literally the evidence suggests a very concerning link between plastic exposure and cardiovascular health. Also, tons of studies linking microplastics to cancer. And generally, microplastics they cause basically a pro-tumorigenic environment in the body. Okay, there's so many cancers that microplastics have been associated with that, too many to name basically all the cancers. However, the one that continues to show the biggest association is with colon cancer, colorectal cancer, which, don't know if you know, early onset colorectal cancer is massive and growing, especially in young people under the age of 40. So there have been many reviews, right? But here's a little snippet from one. Their unique role as Trojan horses further exacerbates cytotoxicity and activates carcinogenic pathways, highlighting a multifaceted contribution to colorectal cancer initiation and progression. All right, I will very briefly touch upon microplastics in the brain and penetrate the blood-brain barrier, which then can further disrupt, the integrity of the blood-brain barrier. Neuroinflammation can then lead to more microplastics and nanoplastics aggregating there because they do aggregate in inflamed tissues. Multiple reviews show micro and nanoplastics are linked to accelerated neurodegeneration and overall just neurotoxicity. But all of that is even inadequate. That's not even half of the risk. Only the half of the risk of microplastics is ever measured in any of these studies. And you want to know why? Because all plastic is made out of polymers and chemical additives. So in these studies, they are only ever measuring the physical pieces of plastic and what they physically do to the tissue in that moment, but they're not looking holistically at all of the chemicals that plastic brings in, which also have been shown to be very bad for our bodies. All plastic is made out of polymers and chemical additives that are not, bound to those polymers. There's over 16,000 chemicals that are used within plastic production, but our everyday commodity plastics have at least 400 chemicals in them that we know to be hazardous to human health and have been proven to leach out from the polymer bonds. There's also thousands of chemicals that are within plastic that we have no toxicity data on. There was a study published for the Global Plastics Treaty that found that just a handful of the most well-known chemicals that are used in plastic cost the United States $249 billion every single year because of all the diseases and disorders that they cause. What's even worse is that study was just updated for this year's Global Plastics Treaty. It found that in the United States alone, just 3 plastic-related chemicals are responsible for $675 billion in yearly health damages. Microplastics also have a Trojan horse effect. Despite their small size, these particles can absorb and accumulate various toxic compounds, including antibiotics, heavy metals, additives, chemical pollutants, as well as opportunistic pathogens, which facilitate the spread of these substances throughout air, water, and soil, and throughout our body. Many of these chemicals are lipophilic, which is why they're showing up in different parts of our brain. Many of them bioaccumulate, and many of them are non-monotonic as well. Not good.